Welcome to the Mental Health Boot Camp podcast.
Hello, hooray!
This is the podcast where 4 psychotherapists, 3 of us Canadian, 1 of us Americans, serve you cutting-edge mental health knowledge. I am Dr. Ryan House, clinical psychologist from Pasadena, California.
And I'm Dr. Brooke Lewis, a registered clinical counselor from the Greater Vancouver area.
And I'm Joanna Boyd, clinical counselor from Port Moody.
I'm Chris Boyd, psychotherapist from Port Moody, British Columbia.
Welcome, everybody. Here we are, 2 weeks in a row. How fun is that?
That's amazing. What a track record.
What a track record. That's right.
We're back.
We'll see. We'll see what happens after this. Hiatus till Christmas.
You never know. But I'll tell you, this is our 89th episode of the podcast.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of hours we put into this. We should be proud of ourselves. Pat ourselves on the back. How are you guys at self-affirmations? Just speaking of that, do you do any of that stuff? Are you good at giving yourself compliments, or is that a challenge? What do you think about that?
Oh man.
I think I'm getting better at it. At first I thought self-compassion. I'm getting better at self-compassion. Like if I mess something up and then be like, that's okay because this, versus a compliment just coming from something. But no, there are things I think out of pride. Like if I've done something and I'm very proud of it, then I'm like a preschooler trying to show my teacher all like whatever I did on the weekend, you know?
Yeah.
Let me show you this item that I'm so proud of.
Yeah. That's very cool.
I think for me, it's more like I'd be maybe considered mantras. Just like if a thought pops into my mind, instead of taking the bait and fixating on it, I'll use the wise words of Queen Elsa and just say, let it go. Get my mind back in the moment.
Good.
So I do a lot of that stuff, or maybe psych myself up a bit on Mondays, say it's gonna be a great day, or rock it today, that kind of thing. But it's more of that type of stuff for me.
Yeah, it's definitely always a work in progress. I think it depends what's going on and how stressful life is and what's happening. I think easier said than done sometimes to have some of those positive self-affirmations. But what helps in moments where I might have a hard time focusing on that stuff would be people in my life being able to remind me of things, and so that helps. So sometimes if
like remind you of your wins, remind you of things you've done well.
Yeah, reminding me to maybe be kind to myself, or maybe a positive side of the situation, or just the being kind, self-compassion there. So it's easy to be like, get into the shoulds, or I should be doing this, or why can't I do this, or whatever. And so yeah, nice to have people, if I'm not capable of reminding myself of that, to chime in. So, but always trying, for sure. Some moments are easier than others. So
Yes.
how about you?
I find that I can pat myself on the back pretty easily if it's like an item on my to-do list that I've been meaning to do, and then I finally get it done and I'm like, all right, good. Yeah. Nice work.
Oh, that's a
good one.
That's a real good one. Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, I did that. Good. I crushed that. But there's sometimes that it's also kind of surprising. There's sometimes I get done with a therapy session. I'm like, wow, that was really good. That was really satisfying. I felt like a good connection, or I'll I certainly, my ratio of negative comments to myself is certainly higher than than my positive comments, but I'm working on it. What's that, Chris?
So tell us more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think was it Barbara Fredrickson, a positive psychology person, who said that we have like 8 negative comments towards ourselves for every 1 positive.
That dark negativity bias, right?
Yeah, definitely have a negativity bias. And so I'm I'm human like everybody else. I do tend to do the, oh man, that was a dumb thing to say, or gosh, how could I be so forgetful, or whatever it might be. I'll repeat those things to myself, and so it's like those things seem to come naturally, and the positives are kind of an effort, right? I have to work at those. Good job, you know. Hey, I dropped my kids off at school on time. Way to go, Tiger. You know, those little victories. Kind of tough, but I'd say it's just a habit you try to form and keep at it, and that that overwhelmingly negative self-talk can gradually be dismantled a little bit.
Yeah, I like what you said there too about it doesn't have to be big monumental things. It could be smaller things throughout the day, but just the awareness that you're achieving these things is great.
Yeah.
So expecting every situation for positive elements and just being nice to yourself in that kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so many things we take for granted. Like we get really mad at ourselves if we don't wake up on time, but we don't really congratulate ourselves if we do, you know? So if we could just even be aware of the things, the ways that we are functioning in a healthy manner, and just acknowledge that for a second, that would make a big difference, I think.
Yeah.
It's not that we need to throw ourselves a big parade every time we wash a dish, but just try to keep the balance fair, you know.
You're a pretty good parade though.
Oh yeah, way to go! You
So-
folded laundry. Way to go!
Yeah, so we got a Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, gosh, I guess tonight is a special occasion because it's been a little while since we've done a book club, right?
It's
Yeah.
true. Should we pause for a song?
I do think the only good way to ring in a book club is with Joe's famous song. So let's let her roll right now. Yay! That was amazing.
Well done.
Thank you.
Never gets old.
Thank you.
I should play it
You gotta be
tomorrow night
careful.
at my book club.
Be careful what you say or do on this podcast, because Ryan has all the recordings and can do anything he wants with them. Make songs and little jingles and yeah.
No, I thought we went into the recording studio and really laid all those tracks down. Joe, wasn't that what happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I cut and paste you talking a different one. But yes, so we have the book club tonight, and we are talking about a book that I found to be very intense and very interesting. And even as a therapist, there were some points that I found were very insightful and kind of helped inform the work that I do in some ways. So, I don't know. We'll talk more about that. But the book, Good Morning Monster, right? Author's name is Catherine Gildiner. Gildiner.
Yeah. Canadian psychologist.
Yep.
Canadian
I'll just-
psychologist out of Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say a quick confession is that I actually did not get around to reading or listening to this book, so I'll be learning along with our listeners about hearing about it and looking forward to eventually reading it myself. So just
Well,
wanted to put that out there.
depending what we say about it.
True. We will see. We'll find out.
We will find out. That's right.
Yep.
Well, feel free to ask us some questions.
Thank you.
So, because we want to make sure that listeners, including yourself, have a decent grasp or understanding of the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
We planned it this way because we know that a lot of the listeners don't read the books that we do for the book club. So Joe wanted to be able to empathize and kind of understand what their experience was like. Right?
Yes. Thank you, Brian.
Totally planned.
100%.
As we usually start off, who listened to the book and who read the book?
I listened.
I listened.
I also listened. Look at us.
Oh.
Yeah, I was hoping to read it, but my library didn't have it when I looked. I don't know if you were looking in Coquitlam.
It was in Coquitlam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Port Moody didn't have one. So I went for the audiobook. So I'm
Yep.
curious how it would have come across reading versus listening. Because it is narrated by someone else, not the author.
Right. So a little that we know about this author is that she is, again, a psychotherapist in Toronto there. Seems like she's maybe retired or at the end of her career. She writes this book. She's been working for 30, 40 years in the field in psychotherapy. She was trained actually as a psychoanalyst. At one point, she mentions that. But she works in a very, it's not like Freudian therapy, people lying on the couch, that sort of a thing. She just kind of takes relationships and people's histories and their past into account when she's talking with them. And what this book is it's a storytelling book. She's talking about several clients that she saw for numbers of years throughout her career. One of them is her very first client that she ever saw and saw for several years. And then a kind of a collection of other clients that she saw, and kind of tells the story from beginning to end of their therapy experience together. And so I think it's five. Is it five different stories?
It is 5.
Yeah.
Laura,
Yeah.
Peter, Danny, Alana, and Madeline.
Yes. So I want to
Yeah.
just do a quick aside here and talk about this fact that this therapist is telling stories about her clients. One of my favorite authors, Irvin Yalom, often writes books about his clients. There are other people who talk about their clients in therapy, and yet we don't want to freak people out, because confidentiality in our field is the kind of the highest, most important thing that we have in psychology, in therapy practices. The maintaining the privacy and the confidentiality of the client. So what therapists do is disguise and distort the details of the story, so that the identity of the client is not being divulged or disclosed, and they make it so the details are so different that no one would really recognize that person. And oftentimes the authors, the therapist authors, will also get the consent of the client, even though it's being distorted and disguised anyway. They'll get the consent from the client so that they agree that it's okay to tell the story if it's this disguised and all of that stuff. But the reason why there's so many people who still want to tell these stories is because some amazing things happen in therapy that wouldn't be known otherwise. And it's just it can be some very compelling storytelling and really interesting, and stuff that people can really learn from and grow from, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this psychologist says she's written other books, I believe, right?
Yep.
Also like a very novelistic tone to it. Like I think she was a pretty good storyteller in a lot of ways.
And she wrote her own memoir.
Yeah.
She referenced that. And I think there was 2 or 3 parts to that memoir. Yes. Yeah.
So I guess
Yeah.
the point I wanted to make about the whole confidentiality thing before I forget is that if you're a client going to therapy, I don't think you need to worry that your therapist is going to write a book and include all your details in there.
Absolutely.
Or
Or a blog, or a social media post,
a blog, or
or a
social media
podcast,
yes.
or even mentioning it around the dinner table or
Sure.
on transit, or it doesn't leave the room unless there's permission to do so.
Unless there's permission to do so, or some legal issues that cause us to have to make a report or something like that if someone's in harm. But generally speaking, we are professional secret keepers, and we are not going to share details of our sessions with our clients or details about our clients to other people. We at times, even on this podcast, have mentioned, oh yeah, there was a client who once did this, but we're either talking in very general terms, or it's a conglomerate of several clients, or we're not sharing specific information. And I just wanted to put that out there, because that's something that I know that clients get concerned about. Who's going to I'm going to tell you the secret of mine. Who's gonna hear about this, right?
For sure. No, good point.
Right.
Yeah.
Glad you brought it up.
Hey, it's kind of the ethical duty there to make sure. So this collection of stories, which may be a mixture of fact and fiction, but if what kind of happened in the therapy experiences really happened, there's some pretty dynamic stories that were told here, and
Mhm.
so all right,
Yeah.
there's my preamble to this whole podcast. What do you guys think of the book?
The big broad question. So just a note as well, like this book was written for any audience, right? Like it was supposed to be written for general population, not just therapists.
Right.
And I think that general population can read it, but it in many parts, I think Chris, you had brought this up near the start of you listening to it as well. In many parts, I felt like it was more geared towards therapists than to general population.
Yeah.
Some of the language that was used wasn't always defined. Obviously, we knew what that language was or what was being referenced. There was an assumption of a certain level of knowledge in psychology or human behavior at certain points in the book.
That's a good point.
That is one of my biggest pet peeves about psychology, by the way, is the jargon that we therapists can use sometimes and toss around with clients or in articles in different places, kind of making the assumption that, well, everyone knows this, right? When no, not everyone knows what transference is, or what's the difference between behaviorism and psychodynamics. That people don't know these things because they didn't spend 8 years in college learning about it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that is one of the major problems that gives psychology or psychotherapy kind of an image problem, is that we use too much jargon and we're not
We do.
plain language to people.
Yeah. Other parts of the book, another reason why I would say that is some parts she was describing something and kind of give background information as to why she did what she did, but it almost came across this when I was listening, it was coming across as like a teachable moment for somebody who is a therapist. Like, here's why I did do that, and I want to keep the clients. So there's not just jargon for psychology, but there's also these different theories, and different theories have a different way to view at what's important for processes of change and why things are going bad and stuff like that. And so sometimes she would highlight what she was doing and say, I did that because I wanted to make sure that I was doing this or this or this, which would have aligned with a psychodynamic approach. So in those parts too, I don't know if you picked up on that, Ryan, there were just these moments where I felt like it was supposed to be like a mentorship moment for the reader who is assumed to be a practicing therapist. Yeah. But a client to read that, they would understand it, but not in not the nuanced way of a therapist.
I would agree. It's almost like a supervisor kind of talking to a trainee saying, yeah, here's what you do when you're in this situation, right? Or here's what I did. This is a good way to do it, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I like the authenticity there. I think she decided to share those interactions, those specific examples. And yeah, when she explained some of the things or questions she had, I was I kind of caught some of that, like, and then she'd own it. She said, that had to do with my own frustration with the situation, or this is information I wanted to know, and I kind of pushed it, and it was more for my purposes, not the client's. So I like the fact she owned that, and then that teachable moment would kick in. I hope for the non-therapist, that correction would help them understand what is appropriate and what isn't in counseling or therapy. So I hope that they would get something from those moments, but it really did feel like it was geared towards therapists.
It also sounds if it also shows the humanness of therapists as well,
which is good.
I'm sure, like the fact that they're like, you know what, that didn't go, and this is, like, we're all learning. So I think that's good for clients or potential clients to hear as well.
Yeah.
Or non-therapists, I guess.
No, I liked it. Yeah, because she talked about her very first client, and so she, through the lens of a new therapist, but then she kind of had some corrections along the way, or how she would approach it differently.
Right.
So,
Like
again,
as a seasoned therapist, I would have done this.
Yeah.
But I was in my second year of practice, and this is what I did and why I did it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very beneficial as a listener.
Another interesting thing that she did in her storytelling, Brooke mentioned that she had also written a memoir, I guess, that came out maybe a year or two before this. And in her memoir, which I haven't read, but she alludes to the fact that she experienced a lot of trauma of her own growing up, and she was able to point out at times during these stories about her own clients that when they would bring up trauma, and her clients had a lot of trauma in their backgrounds, but she was able to mention and recognize, oh, this was maybe pushing some buttons from my own, abandonment or abuse or something in my own life. So that's what therapists call countertransference, where we feel something kind of triggered in us regarding the work that we're doing with our clients. And so she could point out, like, yes, this was something that was a hot issue for me because of my own history, my own past.
Yeah.
So
that's very true.
That's great insight that again, people who aren't in the field might not be aware that that's something that we do. We kind of have to take stock of our own buttons that might get pushed in therapy sessions, and be aware of that, so that we're not kind of overreacting or underreacting to what the client's saying. We kind of have to know our own stuff.
Yeah.
So
there's even moments where she depicted how she was getting frustrated with certain responses or lack of responses from clients. I think it might have been Danny.
Yeah.
How she was trying to sit with that, and there's that curiosity, and then kind of follow up with that a bit. So I think she owned that well. And again, the authenticity and the honesty, I appreciated that.
So mentioning the stories that she told and the clients she's working with, I mean, trauma really is a big thread here. We're not just talking about people who, like, oh, I'm having some challenges at work, I think I need to find another job. It's more like people who, after maybe a little bit of digging, oftentimes people are coming in for some immediate problem, but she digs a little bit into their life and finds out this, severe history of neglect, tremendous abuse that they experienced. In the case of one of the clients, it was someone who was an Indigenous person who grew up with incredible violence and abuse at the hands of the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the government.
Yeah, that was the client, Danny, in the book, and Indigenous, and part of the residential school system up here. We've talked about that in previous podcasts, but there's a lot of trauma and abuse that happened there.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, these kids were taken away from their families and sent off to schools to kind of, I guess, westernize them. So obviously led to a tremendous amount of issues and concerns that we're still dealing with as a nation right now, trying to help support this community.
I'll say, as the token American here, I had heard about the residential schools, and I heard about, the Indigenous peoples up there and the challenges up there, but I didn't know to what degree until I heard the story about Danny.
Oh,
I did not know that had not trickled down here until I heard about that. And so if any folks in the US feel a little underinformed about the horrendous abuse, violence, trauma experienced by the Indigenous peoples in Canada, this is a good story to read.
yes, as just one. There's another book, if listeners are interested. It's fiction, but it is based off of things that truly did happen in residential schools. It's called Five Little Indians. And it's a great book. So it follows 5 children who went through the residential system and how they came out and reconnected and whatnot. So it's a good read as well for therapists, because it links in trauma, and then how does that impact the life moving forward in the next generation. And Yeah, it was horrendous what happened.
It
Like
just,
there's no other, yeah, it was horrendous.
I mean, I know that we'll get into this more later, but I did not realize that all the children were taken out of their homes, taken away from their parents, put into these schools, boarding schools, and basically taught not to be indigenous people anymore. Don't
Yes.
speak the language. Don't use any
Yes.
gestures, anything like that. Be like the whites or like the Canadian people
Yeah.
who live there, right? Be like them. So that, and then we're going to send you back. And every time you do something that's more like the native peoples, you're going to be punished. So they get this kind of drilled into their heads, and then when you kind of graduate from the school, you go back to your folks, and now you're ostracized by them because you're acting more like the whites. It's just a total no-win situation for these folks.
Yes, and that's if they were able to go home to their family.
If
Often they weren't able to relocate them, or they were too far away from their families.
Ugh.
Often they were given fare, like bus fare. And so at 16 is when you left the school and you were given X number of dollars and put on a bus, and that bus dropped you off in downtown Vancouver. And you didn't know where your family was, how to get to them, because chances are they don't live in downtown Vancouver. And here you have $30, and what are you going to do? So you need to find somewhere to live and find work, and yeah, it just kept going. Anyways,
Yeah,
whole different ball game there.
Then the parents coping with their kids being taken away, which happened in most
Yes.
circumstances.
Not
And,
just being taken away, the children were stolen from them.
Yeah.
Like I think taken away is actually a soft way to say it.
Yeah.
Authorities would come and steal the children. They would abduct the children from the home while the parents are confused and upset, and they would never see their children again. They had no communication with them. The children weren't able to go back for Christmas vacation, summer vacation. They would not see or hear from their children. Their names, the children's names were taken away. They were given numbers. So they didn't even have a name.
Yeah. And then there's also, so a lot of the indigenous people were put onto reserves, often land that wasn't very desirable. But if you actually want to leave the reserve, you'd have to get permission from an Indian agent. So someone who works for the government who would give you permission to leave for a certain amount of time. So I think there were some circumstances where parents can go pick up their kids, but often the kids are in another province or so far away or didn't have permission to leave the reserve to get their kids. So
wow.
Yeah, so you think of, yeah, pretty awful situation all around. So
So this was one of the clients that she worked with, and she actually did a lot of good because she didn't know that much about their experience either, or this client's experience and the experience of all the people who went through this. So she did some research and talked to experts and that sort of thing, which is kind of neat to hear about her kind of getting more invested. Let me figure out what I can do to help out these people.
yeah, and she went all in on that, didn't she?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like she really reached out to some of the specialists and obviously folks in the indigenous community, and just to really try to understand how to best support this client. So
Yes.
I feel that she put a lot of time, her own time, of course, into it, just because she really wanted to support Danny,
Yeah.
which is a great message for therapists and also for clients, that therapists should have a decent cultural understanding of those differences, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the Danny chapter for me was my, I learned the most chapter, but that was probably because of the learning more of First Nations culture
Which we've been trying to do
and
actually.
healing,
Yeah.
which is, we've been trying to engage in that more. So in that realm, I think that was the most enlightening chapter for me. The other chapters were heavy trauma and cultural references in there. So one of the fellows came from an Asian background, and the abuse that he suffered was very intense as well.
Extremely, yeah.
Extremely, and obviously not totally lined up with the culture, but there were some cultural components in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
the other three, were there cultural components to the other three?
I think the
No.
last one, the cultural piece was more like a class piece. She was
That's it.
Yeah,
someone who had
class.
very, very high upper class, privileged sort of life, and but had some real
Yeah.
trauma in that.
Yeah. And the fourth, the diversity piece was sexual orientation
Mm-hmm.
as well. Yeah, so there was some diversity throughout the clients in that regard, which is good. But yeah, a lot of severe trauma. So something that stood out for me, Ryan, when I was reading it in the first client, and as directed towards you, because this author is psychodynamic, I have psychodynamic undertones to my work, but I'm not pure psychodynamic.
Sure.
And in part of the chapter, she says, at one point, she's like, so it was coming time where I needed to come up with a treatment plan for my client. We had been working together for a year and we really needed to figure out our treatment goals. And my mouth dropped. A year without treatment goals?
Yeah.
Or a plan? So like, is this normal psychodynamic? Does it take a year to do intake and figure out where to go? Because I feel like that's kind of part of the alignment for me. I get that train moving a little faster.
I don't think you'd find any contemporary psychodynamic therapist who would wait a year to figure out what the goals are. Typically that's in the first session. What are you here to work on? What would you like to do?
Magic wand. If everything was better, what would be better?
And those might change. It might be like, oh, well, I just want to figure out how to talk to my spouse. Then it might be, you might realize after digging around there, oh, you can't talk to your spouse because you have all these abuse issues from your past. Okay, now that's the goal, right? So I don't think anyone would be waiting quite that long, a year, before figuring out what are we doing here. That seems like a long hello.
Yes, it seemed like a very long hello. And so I thought I would bring that up to you. Do you recall that moment in the book? Did you have a similar reaction of like, a year? What are you?
Yeah. I do, now that you mention it. I wouldn't recall it if you didn't mention it here, but yeah, I do remember that, thinking, yeah, seems like a long time. But there is, so with the psychodynamic work, and I know it's a jargony term, again, we want to define our terms. It's just this work that has to do with looking into the past, and it also has to do with the relationship between the therapist and the client. And you're also working against, or trying to figure out what the defenses are that the client's working with, right? Like, well, how are they avoiding going to the deeper places? And sometimes that takes some time, as it did with all of these clients. I mean, there's one of my little interesting points to this, and I'm not sure if this is about how she works or how she decided to write about these clients, but there's a little bit of a formula to what she was doing, right? She would talk about the client comes in and they're kind of resistant, or they don't really want to be there, or they don't, they're not really willing to do some of the harder stuff. One of the clients wasn't even willing to talk about the big issue for like 3 years or something, right? So there's this defense thing that she bumps up against. And then they finally go into the deeper, there's kind of a breakthrough, and they go into the deeper work, and they kind of view their world a different way. They make some changes in their life. And then after magically, after 4 or 5 years, the therapist says, well, it looks like we're done here. And then they're done. And that was a little startling for me right there, because oftentimes that's a decision that clients and therapists make together. At least me and my clients make that together. But
Yes.
she just kind of announces, hey, looks like you're done. And then they go their separate ways. And then she meets up with them for coffee 20 years later to rehash their experience, right?
Yes, that's interesting, because in another one of the chapters, maybe Alana's, she said, and then we're entering our final phase of therapy where we're going to teach coping skills or whatever, so that she didn't have to, spoiler alert, I'm going to spoiler alert. on Alana, she may have another diagnosis. They ponder whether or not she has multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. And so to prevent her from splitting back into a different personality, she's going to need these new coping skills, and that's going to be their final phase. However, nowhere else in the book do I remember her talking about phases or like explaining conceptually what those phases are or what they're in, or it was just out of nowhere. Now there was this terminology of we're entering the final phase.
Yeah, kind of, I was too neat and tidy.
Yeah.
And
I was like, I didn't know you were operating in phases.
Yeah.
So that part was like, it was just a bit disjointed when she used that language for me.
Sure. And I think these are things, again, that we as therapists can look at and go, that's weird. That doesn't seem to be theoretically sound or something like that. I don't know that the reader would necessarily pick up, someone who's not in the psychology field might not pick up on that stuff, but for us, we're able to say, what's going on here? What kind of a framework are you really using, right?
So I'm curious, like, what do you two think was the purpose of this book? What do you think the author was trying to provide to the reader?
I think a number of different things. I think she frames it as if these are 5 heroes, right? 5 individuals who've experienced crazy intensive trauma, and through their own resiliency and through therapy was able to see some growth and change happen there, right? So again, with her writing style, telling novelistic and storytelling, I think that will resonate with people, but I think it's definitely a story of resiliency.
I would agree. I think there's a big part of that where she talks about not just being we've said the word psychodynamic a lot, but there's a relational component to this very much as well. And I think she's talking about how the relationship of therapy helps people to grow, and how not just facts or insights or techniques, but the relationship itself is a healing part of therapy. And she formed really important bonds with these people, each of them, and some of that bond was what helped them to finally trust her more and open up more and break through in significant ways. So I think I think it's kind of a commercial for the therapeutic relationship as being a very crucial component to healing, or just relationships in general being a crucial component to healing. We need other people in order to get through the biggest problems in our life.
Yeah, I think it's also, in terms of trauma, very educational, how trauma can impact someone, and the healing process, what the healing process can look like. And to your point, the relational component. So those stories though are very powerful. And I think Alana's story, I mentioned this to you guys a few weeks ago, that there was some really, really disturbing stuff that happened to Alana.
Yeah. Well, to all of them.
All of them. But
Alana's
the scope and scale of it, just a tremendous amount of sexual abuse from the age of 4 to 8.
Yeah.
And extremely sadistic father, a psychopath.
My vote is he was a psychopath.
Absolutely.
She didn't use that term in there, but no remorse.
There are definitely some markers in there. But and the grandmother, just awful things that happened. But I was a little shocked by some of that, and I've worked with clients who've experienced a lot of trauma and abuse. So I think if this is a book for the general population, then my goodness, that chapter, or all the chapters, but for me, that chapter specifically should have had
well, but Peter was like locked away in a cage essentially for nearly 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
He was by himself in a little space with a bathroom bucket.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
And then he was taken home where he slept alone and then was brought back and put back in this
Yeah.
essentially a cage for years.
It
Yeah.
sounds like there's a lot of different kinds of traumas, not really what's worse than what, but it sounds
sure.
like for a different reader,
Yeah.
like Chris, it was a bit shocking to hear the Alana stuff,
Yeah.
more so for whatever reason. And that's yeah,
Absolutely.
so it's just there could be
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff for the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
I'm
was,
just
it was a heavy
thinking
book. Yeah.
There, yeah, a trauma warning right from the get-go, I
Yeah.
guess is where I'm going with that. Like
Yeah.
it,
Yeah, from the first chapter for sure, saying these stories are, and the thing is, she actually purposely held back on a lot of the details and a lot
Yes.
of these stories, and she mentioned that, but still the details that she included were pretty harsh.
your mind can fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, definitely heavy. And I've got to say, maybe this is the cynic in me a little bit, but to your question about what was the purpose of this, I think with a lot of kind of therapy memoirs from therapists, and there are a lot of them out there, really. There's a little bit of hey, wasn't I clever here? Or a little bit of hey, learn from me. Look at the cool thing I did with this client, right?
Yeah.
Which can be aided by the fact that part of it's fictional and we're and it's retrospective, and the therapist is writing the story, but there's a little bit of, wow, I was pretty good at this. So I don't know. I think I have to imagine a little bit of ego must go into some of these sort of, let me tell you what I did in therapy stories as well too.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I asked just because I'm kind of confused on it myself, right? Like, was this, meant to give readers a glimpse of what therapy is like? Is it to provide education on trauma? Is it to provide therapists with some guidance? But I think Yellum does that really well, like in his, like the way that he tells therapeutic stories is geared towards therapists. An everyday person can read it, but but it's based more on the therapist process, and this was not clearly the client process and not clearly the therapist process. Like it was relational in the writing, and then I think that made me, I wasn't quite clear what I was supposed to get from the book.
Interesting. I can see that. Sure. Who exactly is the audience? I mean, it's sold a lot. It's been read by a lot of people. It won some awards. I mean, it's been widely acclaimed, but right, it's a little unclear as to what is that focus?
Yeah.
Or for me, a little bit.
Yeah.
The couple takeaways for myself. First, I forgot to mention this earlier. Whoever narrates the book, I think she's a voice actor, but I found it tough to listen to at times because based on the cultural background, she was actually shifting her cadence. So with Peter, who in the book is Chinese Canadian, her pausing almost seemed as if she was speaking with an accent. But they actually mentioned in the book that he actually never learned Mandarin. He's just learned English. So I don't know. And also with some of the other clients too, she was shifting her tone and but anyways, I felt that was a little tough to listen to at times. Another observation too was did you guys notice that, by the way, or was that just me?
I think I noticed it because you mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
But she did, and the indiscrepancy there, like the fact he never actually learned Mandarin, right? Like, she did shift her voice for all the characters, right? She was trying to differentiate.
Yeah.
And then each story, like each client would have had to have a different voice. So trying to figure out what that was, but it was a stereotyped voice for all of them. Yeah.
I think it's I don't know what goes into the world of the voice actors that I've read through hundreds of books on Audible, but there's got to be some interesting decisions made there. It's like, what am I going to make this person sound like, right?
Obviously, that's her profession and whatnot.
Yeah.
Anyways, another observation too, just as the reader, my goodness, these kids experience so much so many difficulties and challenges, but I feel they're let down quite a bit by the adults
Oh
in their
yeah.
lives. I think we were talking a bit about that, Brooke, there's so many, it seemed like there's so many signs there that these kids are suffering. And doctors and police officers and teachers and
Yeah.
social workers and neighbors, and just really let these kids down. So
And I was like, am I missing something in my own
Yeah.
life? Is this happening around me? And like, it definitely got me a little bit paranoid.
yes, some in retrospect, of course, I understand there's a fictional component to the book, but just that awareness of that, hey, sometimes there's kids suffering, and you may want to follow up or ask questions, or when in doubt,
Check it out.
check it out. Just an observation on the storytelling there, or the clients who were portrayed.
Right. That's it. Do you guys have a piece of paper handy?
No.
No,
Okay, well, you do have fingers handy though, right?
no.
Okay.
We're going to
What
make our
book?
big assessment on a scale of 1 to 10.
Can't
What?
use halves, I guess.
Can't use halves because you got a full finger. So your grade for this book on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, 5 for Brooke,
Yeah.
8 for Chris, 7 for me.
I was gonna go like 7.5, by the way, but
I was gonna go 6. And I took away my thumb.
Well, your thumb.
Yeah.
I was 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 for Brooke. Tell me about that, Brooke.
Yeah, like I do think there's a lot of really good things in there.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be on the negative side. I didn't want it to be like a 4 or 3 or anything like that.
Yeah.
But would I recommend this book? Probably not. But I probably wouldn't, because I'm not clear on what the purpose is. I can't clearly say, like, suggest this book, because I wouldn't be able to, like, there's a sales phrase called find a need and fill it. And so if there's a need in the client, I could not say whether or not this book will fill it, because I'm not really, it's very unclear. I think it was just too unclear for me.
Yep.
There's storytelling, there's trauma. I don't know how much people will walk away with. Though maybe a new therapist, I would recommend it to a new therapist.
Yeah.
But yeah. Will I read it again? Probably not. Yeah.
Fair
So
enough.
not great, not bad.
Okay.
So neutral.
I had the middle score at 7, so I'll say that I appreciated her getting kind of deep into the traumatic elements of some of these people's lives, and also the healing from those traumas. I don't think there's enough out there about that. The book What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu is a book about complex trauma that someone experienced on deep level, and she talks about her healing process and that sort of thing. And so I actually have recommended this book to several clients of mine who experienced trauma in their lives. People who I felt like could kind of handle this and were really interested in this, and how do I get through this, and what does it look like, and it's been pretty positive from them. And one of the clients who had an experience that's very similar to one of the stories in the book, so it was like, yeah, read this story. This was one that really speaks to you, because I think that's important. I actually think it's important for people who've experienced trauma to hear other people's trauma stories, so they don't feel like I'm alone in this. I'm the only one who ever experienced this. And it kind of validates and also helps them feel like, okay, there's some hope, there's a way out. So that's what I think about this. And I had mentioned my, the kind of formulaic pieces and the jargon and some of that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I think I'm glad the book exists. Let me put it that way. Glad it exists. I probably won't reread it myself either, but it was an interesting read. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed the book overall for a number of different reasons. I have actually recommended it to two clients as well.
Yeah.
Similar to you, Ryan, it was like, listen to this one particular one. I think would be very
Yeah.
beneficial for them.
Yeah.
With some disclaimers in terms of the nature of it, but yeah, I felt they would be able to handle that and be intrigued by that. I've also recommended What My Bones Know too. I like the storytelling element of it.
Yeah.
I feel that you know, if like The Body Keeps Score is a big trauma book, and even A Boy Who Raised a Dog, some storytelling in there too.
What happened to you?
What happened to you? But I just like the progression of the stories, and I actually did learn a lot from her approaches and how she conceptualized it and how she pinpointed what might have been going on, and I like the fact she owned it when she talked about some of her mistakes, and then so I thought that was helpful to hear that. But the stories were really impactful. I think we need more good trauma books out there. You know, trauma is a big buzzword right now.
Yeah.
I feel that's one of the better trauma books I think I've read. I think I liked it more than I can. I shouldn't. I really like Bruce Perry's books a lot. So I think Bruce Perry, for me, his books are still up there as number one. But I think it's definitely up there with Bessel's book for the storytelling elements of it.
It's more accessible than Bessel's.
More accessible, and I just like the flow of it. So, anyways, yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't think I need to read it again, but I definitely took a lot from it.
Okay, so there we go. Little mixed reviews here. 5, 7, and 8. Joe, given what we've said about the book, how inclined are you to take a look?
Yeah, as a therapist, I'd be inclined. I'm curious to at least, check out some of the stories. I think it's having worked a lot with trauma in the past and still in some ways, I'd be curious to how she worked with some of these people, because I've worked, so I'm intrigued. But
cool.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Good morning, Monster. What's our next book going to be, everybody?
Joanna?
Brooke?
Chris?
Okay, Chris?
Sibo?
We've chosen to do a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. So it's a book about plant medicine and indigenous wisdom. And kind of Brooke suggested we have a Truth and Reconciliation Day coming up at the end of September here in Canada. And so just a book in honor of just learning more about the indigenous cultures. And,
what is Truth and Reconciliation Day? What's that about?
It's a step towards the reconciliation. So being truthful about Canadian history, truthful about the colonization and residential schools and what's happened with our First Nations people, our Métis people. And yeah, so it's interesting. Last year was the first year and I didn't know what to expect, like the tone of it. I'm glad the day has been made. It was unfortunately really made after they started finding the unmarked graves of the children, and that kind of fast forwarded things. But yeah, it was great. We actually went to like a First Nations cultural center. We were in Whistler for the work retreat there, and we were able to go to the center, and they had a lot of activities. So learning about carvings and histories, and the museum was open, and you could participate in nature walks and learn more about the way humans need to be harmonious with nature and the land and ways of being and connecting. And it was great. So I didn't know if it was, not saying this wouldn't have been great, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be more like Remembrance Day, so Veterans Day, where it'd be more somber, but it was actually more like, it was more educational. And yeah, So Truth and Reconciliation Day is about being truthful and coming forward with honoring our history and taking steps to reconcile. So
That sounds great. Glad they do it. Is it like a holiday, like a day off sort of a day, or
federal, which means, yeah, all the federal employees, it's a day off, but it's not a stat. So I think schools have it off, right? But
Yep.
private sector, like private companies don't have to pay extra for their employees on that day or have a day off. It's up to them. They can choose if they want to take that day or not. Similar to the opposite of Truth and Reconciliation Day, sort of, but the Queen's funeral, in observance of the Queen's funeral, the federal employees have that all off. Schools are closed, but it's up to the private companies if they would like to close for the day so
no
that you can
kidding?
observe the funeral. Yeah.
No kidding. That is wild.
So now there's definitely like a little bit of like, hey, companies, if you're going to close for the observance of the Queen's funeral, you better be closing for Truth and Reconciliation Day. Like there's calling out,
Yeah.
which is good to say, hey, this is Truth and Reconciliation Day is very important.
Wow. When is the Queen's funeral? I don't even know when it is.
Monday.
Monday. I don't think they're making it a holiday here. Must have something to do with a little war that we had many years ago. I don't know. But I know there will be a lot of people watching. Oh my gosh. Still big news down here for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So braiding
Sweetgrass.
sweet grass, braiding sweet grass. Find it in your bookstore, find it on Audible, find it wherever, and read it up. And we will talk about it in a while.
Yeah. And if listeners are looking for another book about experiences of residential schools, I highly recommend Five Little Indians. And that is, again, it's a novel, but it is based off of experiences people would have gone through in the residential school system. It's very good.
And if people want to know more about trauma, What My Bones Know is
Excellent.
quite a book as well. Whew, Stephanie Fu. Yes. Well, all right then. I guess that concludes our book club. So that's it. We will say goodnight for now. Please like and subscribe on Apple, Google, Podbean, Audible, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. Send your questions to us somehow. Not sure. Carrier pigeon, maybe. Do we have an email address?
I don't even know.
Look for us on Instagram or definitely on Facebook. That's a better place, I guess. Tell a friend or two. That's it. Good night. See you later, everybody.
Good night,
Bye
everyone.
now. Thanks for listening.
Bye.